Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving into a thinker so controversial, his very name literally became a synonym for ruthless evil. We are breaking down Niccolo Machiavelli's views on religion and politics line by line, moving way past the basic summaries so we can absolutely master this topic together. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with a medieval background, move into religion as a tool, contrast Roman and Christian faiths, tackle appearance and scholars, dive into a critical evaluation, and finally wrap it all up with a full model answer. Stick around for that last bit because we're going to synthesize everything into an absolute masterclass format.
Okay, part 1, medieval background, the Old World Order.
Let's dive right into this. To really appreciate how radical Machiavelli was, you've got to understand the conceptual universe he was pushing back against. A world where politics was completely and utterly subordinate to religion. Think back to the medieval era. You've got Pope Gelasius I's two swords theory, and St. Augustine's famous division between the city of God and the city of man. Basically, the spiritual sword always swung higher than the temporal sword. Religion ruled politics, period. But then, Machiavelli comes along and executes a radical historical reversal. He doesn't just separate them. He insists that politics must be strictly positioned above religion. Moving to part 2, religion as a tool of governance, stripping away spiritual value. This is where things get really interesting. Machiavelli basically strips away the independent spiritual value we usually associate with faith. Instead, he replaces it with this incredibly utilitarian concept he calls instrumentum regni. That's a Latin term used by scholars, and it directly translates to an instrument of rule or a tool of governance. So for Machiavelli, religion isn't about salvation at all. It's just a practical tool used by rulers to ensure the stability of the state and keep the masses unified. And hey, quick tip. If you're taking an exam or writing an essay on this, intentionally dropping the exact phrase instrumentum regni is a massive high-scoring strategy. It instantly proves to your examiner that you completely grasp his pragmatic worldview. All right, on to part 3, Roman religion versus Christianity, a clash of civilizations. In his famous text, Discourses on Livy, Machiavelli brilliantly illustrates exactly why he favored the ancient world. He actively praises Roman religion because it generated fierce patriotism and martial discipline. In fact, the prominent scholar Quentin Skinner explicitly links this Roman model to civic humanism and republican liberty. But then you contrast that with Christianity. Machiavelli criticized it heavily. Why? Because it promotes humility, passivity, and, otherworldly values. According to him, these traits make citizens passive and fundamentally drain the state of its virtù, that essential vitality, strength, and civic drive. Next up, part 4, appearance, reality, and scholars, the psychological mechanics of rule. To really unpack the psychological mechanics of Machiavelli's theory, let's bring our first star witness to the stand, the brilliant political philosopher Isaiah Berlin. Berlin points out that Machiavelli exposed an irreconcilable dualism between Christian ethics and political necessity, or what Machiavelli called necessità. Think about how explosive that is. Berlin is basically saying that in Machiavelli's analytical world, there is an absolute, unavoidable conflict. You literally cannot be a good Christian and a good ruler at the same time. The morals required to be one will actively sabotage your ability to be the other. And this brings us right to the practical application of that dualism, which is famously detailed in Chapter 18 of The Prince. It's all about appearance versus reality. Since a ruler can't always act like a good Christian if they actually want to protect the state, what do? Well, they fake it. A ruler must outwardly project piety. They have to appear deeply religious and moral to the public to maintain legitimacy and control, even if, behind closed doors, they are operating purely on ruthless political necesidad. Part 5, Critical Evaluation, Judging Machiavelli's Legacy. Now, any thorough explainer needs a strong critique, right? So we introduce Leo Strauss to provide that counterweight to Machiavelli's extreme realism. Strauss famously accuses Machiavelli of outright immoralism. He argues that Machiavelli completely subordinates ethics to raw power, recklessly ignoring the genuine social integration and moral value that religion provides to a society. But you have to balance that severe ethical objection against Machiavelli's undeniable legacy. Like it or not, his brutally realistic approach made a crucial, foundational contribution to the creation of the modern secular state. He was the guy who decisively cut the cord between theology and statecraft.
Finally, part 6, full model answer, UPSC Mains level.
let's move to the grand payoff and see how this all builds into our final synthesis. We're going to take everything we just learned and weave it into a perfect 250-word masterclass answer. Notice how this introduction perfectly sets up the historical contrast. It immediately references the medieval baseline, Pope Gelasius I and St. Augustine, and then sharply introduces Machiavelli's reversal, declaring right off the bat that he turned religion into a mere tool subordinate to politics. It's punchy, and it shows immediate historical command to the reader. Moving into the first body paragraph, we seamlessly integrate those key concepts. We state clearly that religion lacks spiritual value for Machiavelli, explicitly dropping that golden term, instrumentum regni. Then, we pull from discourses on Livy to contrast the patriotism of Roman religion with the passivity of Christianity. Smartly name-dropping Quentin Skinner and the concept of virtue, boom. You've just packed an incredible amount of dense scholarly analysis into a few really structured points.
For the second body paragraph, we pivot to the psychological mechanics. We weave in Isaiah Berlin's irreconcilable dualism between Christian ethics and political necessity. Then, we ground that high-level theory in the practical advice from Chapter 18 of The Prince, the necessity of the appearance of piety versus the reality of ruthless rule. This logically connects the scholar's overarching theory directly to Machiavelli's own textbook instructions. And finally, the critique and conclusion. Here, we show deep analytical maturity by bringing in Leo Strauss's attack on Machiavelli's immorality. It adds so much necessary depth. But notice we don't just end on the attack. We land on a powerful, balanced conclusion. We acknowledge the ethical limits, but we cement Machiavelli's mix of realism and utilitarianism as the decisive first step toward the modern secular state. It is a perfectly rounded, highly persuasive argument. So, the crucial point for constructing your own top-tier analysis going forward is to remember these two steps. Step 1, you absolutely must incorporate heavy-hitting phrases to show your technical mastery. Terms like instrumentum regni, necessita, and appearance versus reality. Step 2, back up those claims by citing at least two major scholars like Berlin, Strauss, or Skinner. Combining Machiavelli's primary text with modern scholarly critique is exactly what elevates your understanding to that highest possible level. We've covered a massive amount of ground today, analyzing a 16th century thinker who fundamentally cracked the foundations of the medieval world. But I want to leave you pondering this. Look around at our world today. Do modern, supposedly secular states still use religion merely as instrumentum regni? Does a shadow of Machiavelli's appearance versus reality still dictate how our modern leaders govern? Think about it. Thanks for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning the systems around you, and I'll catch you next time.